All right. Good morning, everyone. Presentation about authentication in Orchard. For you that don't know me, if we haven't met yet, my name is Alhayek. I am software engineer. Not you. I am one of the contributors at Orchard. There's my email address, LinkedIn, GitHub account if you guys want to connect. If you want to stay up to date with the latest updates of Orchard, follow me on LinkedIn. I do post a lot of tips and updates and anything that's related to the new releases. Trying to keep that LinkedIn group up to date. All right, enough about me. So the agenda, we're going to go over a high-level overview of identity and access management in general. We're going to go cover the different types of authentication. Also a quick overview of OpenID Connect. And also identity management in which report. And then hopefully we'll have time, we'll go through some demonstration to demonstrate kind of all of this in Orchard. This isn't going to be in detail because a lot of these topics, like OpenID, that needs a couple hours by itself. So it would be just a quick overview of the things that can be done today in Orchard and how can we get those done. All right, so two common phrases that are usually used incorrectly when it comes to identity management in general will be authentication and authorization, and that's why I just kind of posted it out there just so we can have them. So authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user or system, whereas authorization is the process of determining what an authorized user can and cannot do. You've been amazed how many times those two terms were used incorrectly. I used them myself before and they're incorrectly too. So authorization is when you go into a system, you log in, you put in username or your credentials, and you gain access to the system. That's authentication. However, if you click on a specific page like the admin dashboard, that's a process of authorization. Can a user, the authenticated user, get access to that page or not? And that's the authorization. So that's a slight difference between the two. We do have different types of authentications. We have single factor, two-factor, and multi-factor authentications when it comes to authentications. And we'll cover these authentication types a little bit more details as they're coming up slides. So single factor authentication. This is the simplest way to verify your identity when it comes to a system. Usually it only requires something that you know, which is typically a username and a password. So if you have that, you'll gain access to the system. There's no other challenges. Systems that are built 10 years ago or whatever, that's how they authenticated. Some of the advantages, it's very simple to implement, very straightforward. It's really not that expensive to implement such a solution, and also easy to manage and deploy. The disadvantages, however, I can put a couple slides worth of disadvantages here because nowadays, with technology where it is, it's really easy to steal someone's identity or credentials. So it's vulnerable to attacks like phishing, brute force, and credential stuffing. Also, password fatigue. People intend to reuse the same password on multiple sites, which is a problem because if one site got hacked and the password is compromised now, you can utilize that compromised password to hopefully gain access to other systems because it's the same credentials. Also, the lack of redundancy. If the password is compromised or forgotten, users, they don't have a way to retrieve that or regain access to their account. So, sorry, I'm kind of trying to go so fast. I want to save time for the demo, which is more important, I think. So how can we take these disadvantages and how can we improve authentication in our apps? That brings me to two-factor authentication. Most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the two-factor authentication, and you probably have had a need to implement it or at least use it in one of the apps that you have access to, since most of you are some sort of an admin. So with two-factor authentication, it enhances security by requiring two forms of identification. So something you would know, which is your credentials, like we mentioned earlier, but also something you have, which is a device of some sort. So even if you know your username and password, you can't automatically gain access. You'll need one other additional form to access. Typical implementations of this will be either email, SMS, authenticator app. The way how it works is when you try to log in, you put your username and your password, the system will validate that. Once the system is able to determine, hey, that is valid, we send you a token, a short token, 6 to 8 digit code, and some even have 10. And that code is only good for like about a minute. And you're supposed to take that code, put it in the system, and then that's your second layer of identification. So even if the password and the username and the password are exposed, now whoever has that information needs the device, access to that device somehow. If they have access to that device, then well, they're gonna gain access. So some of the advantages here, it significantly enhances security, obviously, because now you have a second layer of a defense. It protects you against phishing attempts, password stuffing, and other type of attacks. One of the big ones, I think, when it comes to two-factor authentication is compliance. Many of us deal with sensitive data like PCI data or other data like healthcare. So you'll need some sort of a second form of identification before you're able to get access to a lot of them. So if you work with any of these data, they're going to require you to have some sort of second two-factor authentication at minimum to gain access to their systems and have access to that data. One of probably the drawbacks of two-factor authentication for typical user is the user convenience, because now they have to have a second device to be able to gain access. They can complain all day long, they still have to deal with it because that's just how we are going to be able to secure those apps. The other thing is a dependency on a device. So now you have to have a device plus something if you for some reason lost access to that device, well, you're going to be locked out until you're able to use options for recovery. Cost, it's a lot more complicated and complex to develop a two-factor authentication solution. So that's another drawback. We don't have that problem with Orchard. There's also potential bypass. So if someone somehow gain access to the second factor authentication device, then they're able to get in. For example, we utilize email. Well, if someone was able, if you're using the same credentials to log into your email with, well, now they have access to the site, plus they have access to your email, and then they can just retrieve that token and just log in with no problems. Or if you're using the SMS, you could fall in the SMS swapping attack, and then someone can basically gain access to your phone, and then they're able to retrieve that token. But obviously, it's much harder to do such a thing than just know your username and password. So although these are disadvantages, they are still by far better than having no second factor authentication. So again, we talked about disadvantages. How can we improve it even better? And that is what multi-factor authentication is all about. So it adds multi-layers of security requiring 3 forms of identification at minimum. Which is something username and password, something you have, which is again a device. So it just adds another layer on top of two-factor authentication. And the last thing is something you are. So now even if someone have the first 2 forms, well, you need you to be able to gain access. And by something you are, we mean biometrics, like fingerprint, right? or face recognition. So you'll need to have your device to be able to unlock it with your credentials or your face or your thumbprint in order to gain access to that device that has that second factor token. So, like I said, phone, right? So you'll have your phone, you'll need to be able to unlock it with your thumb or your face. So the common implementation will be two-factor authentication, which is email, SMS, or app authenticator. There's more ways, in addition to biometrics. All right. So the advantages of multi-factor authentication substantially enhances security, obviously, because now you have 3 hoops you have to get to in order to regain access to that one identity. It will give you a higher compliance. Some of the compliance, like PCI, I believe they allow you to use two-factor authentication, but if you have admin access, you'll need multi-factor authentication. So it depends who you are and what data you have access to, that level of security goes up. So compliance obviously is the biggest deal when it comes to sensitive data. Disadvantages, again, user convenience, lockout risk, because now you have more things to do. If you lose one device or the device, it can be really harder to regain access. False security is something that happens automatically because people feel that because I do have multi-factor authentication, I do not have to worry about creating a good password. So that's one issue, is that we still have to have a really strong password. We can't just rely on authentication, because yes, it's a multi-factor authentication. Yes, it's secure, but it's not 100%. There's nothing 100%. So it's just how much will a hacker willing to go to try to regain access to your identity. And the most probably drawback of multi-factor authentication is old apps. Not all apps do support multi-factor authentication. So that's probably the biggest one for multi-factor authentication. All right, so like I said earlier, OpenID, this one requires probably a couple hour session just to cover OpenID. So I thought because it's authentication related, I'm going to squeeze that in there, and then we're going to see a demo. Hopefully it'll give you a better idea of what we do with OpenID Connect. So OpenID Connect is often confused with Auth 2.0. OAuth 2.0 is a protocol and that provides you a way to authorize a user. For example, if you need to implement a solution where you can ask an X user to be able to share something on their behalf, they'll authorize you to do it, but they'll never share their identity with you. So it's just you're giving them a request or authorization to do it. That's like what Auth 2 does. It doesn't do any type of authentication. But that's when OpenID comes in handy. So OpenID is a layer that sits on the top of 2.0. It utilizes a 2.0 protocol, OAuth 2.0 protocol, to enable something to allow us to do authentication. Okay, so again, it doesn't really exchange credentials or whatnot, but it allows us, it gives us information just enough for us to be able to create authentication. It delegates the responsibility of verifying identities to a third-party provider. There's a lot of those that are already out there, like Microsoft, they have their own identity, Google, Facebook, there's a lot more. So you can use their servers to be able to log in. So if you want to reuse your Facebook credentials to gain access to your system, well, you can connect it to systems, and you can utilize the Facebook provider to authenticate into your own app. So some of the benefits of OpenID Connect is standardized authentication process, which is great. Now you have specification that you can go about and you can accomplish authentication. How can you handle authentication using a standard way? One of the big things that you can do with Open Connect is you can create a single sign-on. So if you have multiple applications in your environment, you could dedicate one application that is solely responsible of authentication, so it'll become your provider, your identity provider, and then all the rest of the apps can connect to it. The benefit of such approach, it kind of decouples microservices from having to worry about identity or authentication, because now your authentication process is in one place. So it has its goods and it has its bad. It's bad because if one person gain access to that one application, they can gain access to absolutely every single app. The good thing about it is that you don't have to complicate small micro projects with authentication, because that is done somewhere else. Another advantage with single sign-on is that you're able to force new security measures on one side only, so you can enable two-factor authentication on one application. Now, any user that wants to connect to any of these apps will have to enable two-factor authentication or even multi-factor authentication. Another great thing about OpenID Connect is that there's a lot of providers already support it. So if you want to utilize, like I mentioned, Facebook, well, they do have an integration, so you can just connect to their app and allow your users to be able to log in through Facebook, and not just Facebook, but any provider. And we'll go later on. We'll go through a demo of how we can accomplish single sign-on in Orchard. All right, so identity management, like I said, is a huge topic, so I'm kind of just scratching the surface here. So one of the good things about Orchard in general is that we use ASP.NET as a platform, or the framework that we built on top of. So we automatically get the benefit of ASP.NET. In fact, if you develop in ASP.NET, most likely you'll be able to develop an Orchard code easily for the most part. There are a few things that are Orchard specific, but mainly we try to keep it native as much as possible. So one of the things that we utilize identity framework to authenticate users for robust authentication and authorization. So if you're already familiar with ASP.NET, you're in good hands. So we kind of took the framework, the ASP.NET Core framework, and we added a little bit more of things that are Orchard specifics. So we have a class called permission. Hopefully everyone is familiar with it, but it allows you to create an instance of a permission by providing a unique ID, which is a string, and just a description that is visible in the UI, so people can actually see and know what this permission means. And the second thing we have is the iPermission provider, and the iPermission provider allows you to bootstrap your permission with the rest of the app. So that your app, your UI, your authentication, everything knows about that custom permission that you implemented. And last one is authorization service, and this is part of the .NET identity project. And this one just allows you to say, hey, does this authenticated user have permission to do this, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So I'm going to kind of show some code examples here. Just hopefully most of you have done this before, but if not, so this is how you can create a instance of that permission. It's a read-only permission. In this case, it is a static, but you can also create dynamic, and we use dynamic a lot in Orchard. Not a lot, but we do use it. So in this case, I'm defining a static instance of, and I named it access profit and loss report. And as you can see, the first parameter is the ID, and the second parameter is the description for the UI. And I implemented here the permission provider. And there's two methods. There's a get permissions, and then there's Git default stereotypes. So the Git permissions allows you to say, hey, here's all the custom permissions that I want to use later, so you're aware of them. And then the default stereotypes, it just allows you to, by default, grant a specific roles this permission. So if this is part of a module that I'm working on, when that module or that feature is enabled, the admin will get access to the access to profit and loss report automatically. None of the other roles will though. You can still go and change that. You can go through the UI and change that and say, hey, I don't want this role to have it, or maybe I want a specific role to even have the same permission. But this is just a default. And the other thing that you have to do is you have to register it. I bet most of you don't use that add permission provider extension. It's actually part of 2.0. It's just you can add, register your permission provider as a scoped service, or you can utilize a fancier method that Sebastian does not like. After all, when it's all is done, here's like how a controller would look like. So you'll have a controller, you have your authorization service and inject it in the controller, or in the constructor. And as you can see here, I'm checking, does that logged in user have a permission to my static instance? And then if not, we're gonna tell them, go away. That is really it. We don't have anything, like I said, we try to keep Orchard as much as possible to line up with ASP.NET, so that way whoever wants to jump on Orchard from ASP.NET will be kind of really easy at transition. So I'm gonna go through some demos to see how can we accomplish some of these concepts that we kind of talked about in Orchard. How can we create a single sign-on server provider where I can have all my apps connect to it? And also, how can we enable two-factor authentication in what we already have out of the box? All right, so again, to create multiple sites. Just so we can demo some of these things. So I'm gonna show how can we enable two-factor authentication really quickly in Orchard. And I'll go through some of the available settings out of the box. So if you go to the features, I am there already. And then I type in two-factor, and then you'll see here there's multiple features. One of them you cannot enable or disable, and that one is will automatically be enabled and disabled. It's for services only. However, there's 3 features here that I can pick from. There is a two-factor authentication utilizing the Authenticator app method. If you enable that, users are able to download like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, any of those apps, and they can use that as to receive their two-factor token. We also have the two-factor email method, which will allow you to deliver the two-factor authentication using an email. If you do enable that, you'll also have to enable the email service. And then we also have two-factor SMS method, which allow you to deliver that token using a phone or a text message. Again, if you do that, you'll also have to configure your service, your SMS service. So I did configure the email, and I also configure SMS for this. But if you're wondering, you can just go to the settings here, and then you can go to SMS and configure that, or go to email and configure that. The email has gone through some really nice refactoring in 2.0. So we improved how we configure emails, and as Zoltan mentioned earlier, we have also more implementation when it comes to email delivery. So in this case, let's say I want to enable SMS, and then maybe I'll also enable the email. So now I have these 2 methods. If we click here, you go under security. Now you have authentication. You can configure authentication. If you see the bottom here, there's 2 methods that are enabled. If I disable one of them will go away. But because I have at least one, I also see that menu on the top where it's saying here, select your preference method. Maybe most of the time you want to use SMS, and you can utilize phone, and maybe not. Maybe you want to use emails, and you can set that. And because my email is verified, I can enable it now with no issues. If my email wasn't verified, then I have to verify it. I'll click on verify it, and then I'll be able to enable it. But in this case, it looks like I already verified them. So you can just enable it if you want. But before we enable it, I want to talk about the looks. So it's kind of plain. The UI is not great, but you have options to utilize the theme. There's a reason why we did that. We did it this way. It's because we want to allow you to define any layout that you want for your two-factor. Just like we do with the login, and we do, I believe, registration too. So it's a similar concept. But before we enable it and show you how that works, I'm gonna just kind of go through some of the settings that are available. So because I enabled at least one of the methods, you'll see now under the login settings, you'll have a two-factor authentication tab. And some of these functions are already useful, some of them probably not so much, like the first one. The first one allows the users to remember a client. It kind of defeats the purpose of two-factor authentication, but it's there if you need it. It's off by default. Basically, once you go through two-factor authentication and you authenticate once, then you can say, okay, remember me, and by default, remember you for 14 days. After 14 days, you have to go through that process again. Again, you can use it, but you just got to be aware of the consequence that you're kind of bypassing two-factor authentication for 14 days for that browser. Okay. We have an option that requires two-factor authentication. If you click that and you save it, this is a good option to use. Any user that logs in, they're going to be required to enable two-factor authentication before they proceed. The number of recovery codes to generate, by default, usually when you enable two-factor authentication, I did not mention that earlier, you kind of get some sort of backup codes. Typically they say download it, save it in a safe spot or whatever, because if for some reason you lost access to that device, you'll be able to reuse or use those tokens as a way to recover your account. And those are one-time use. So if you have 5 codes and you use one, then you'll have 4 left. So by default, it's set to 5 because we don't want to have too many codes out there that people can actually use to log in. But obviously, it's a number here that you can change. This is the option that I was mentioning earlier about the theme. Let's say use site theme for two-factor authentication pages, because not all front-end themes are already compatible with these views. So if you want to enable that, you might want to define your own layout for these pages. And then also you can require two-factor authentication for specific roles. So sometimes maybe you just want it for admins. You don't care about the rest so much, but maybe admins are critical roles, so you can just enable it for them. The bottom 2 sections here, these are provider level settings. So in this case here, these are the settings that the email provider will utilize to send that email. So you can kind of customize your own subject. It's more of a template. And then the body, you can utilize that, and you can use that curly brackets code to inject the code. It does support liquid, so you can put liquid if you want. And similarly for the SMS authenticator, you can also change the message that goes out to your phones. Again, you can just inject the code, and it will replace that with code. So now how can we, let's kind of see that in action. So I want to enable it, and let's just say my first choice is going to be a phone, and I'm going to update it. Sign on or log in. So if I can type, I can log in. Okay. So if I log in with my credentials, And now I am prompted with a two-factor authentication. So you notice my credential worked. I got this far, but I can't proceed. I still have to do something else. So here, you can request the one-time token through your phone. Or if you don't have access to see right down here, you can try a different way. So if you click this, you'll notice now we're on the other method, which is an email. And this option is only appears here because I enabled the SMS and also the email providers. And alternatively, you can log in with a recovery code, those 5 codes that should get generated if you have access to that. I can probably try to, I think I enabled the log. So if I click here, now I got a code sent to me. Obviously it's not to my phone, but it's somewhere in the, if I can find the debugger. Why I can't see my debugger? My output.
Yeah, no.
What is it? Yeah, I don't know. All right, whatever. I'll send it to my email. So I also have my email provider connected, and it writes into my temp folder. Where did it go? That's MVC. All right, oops. Email, there you go. All right, so, well, I guess that's an old email, so let me generate a new code. Here, try a different way. Send me to my email, and here goes. So here's my code, copy, paste, and I'm in. All right. So you saw it was challenging because I did lose my phone, so I don't have a token, so I used my other method to do it. And then if you gain access, if you log in, you can change the settings if you want. All right, that's two-factor authentication. Now the other scenario is how can we implement a single sign-on server using Orchard? Again, we will use the OpenID Connect. We have all the features necessary to do that. So what I did to save time is I configured server and 2 tenants already to do that. So I have a server here that I haven't logged into yet, but this is your server, and I'm just going to go through that server so you see the settings that I already put in place. So in order to do this, I enabled the first feature, the OpenID Connect authorization server. So that feature will enable as a server. So you have one server that you can connect to and talk to. So basically this will provide you a way to make your app as an identity provider. We're not going to go too much through their settings because there's a whole lot of settings in here. But if you click here and under authorization server, and if you're familiar with Auth02, these terms might be familiar to you. So there's different type of flows. The only thing I did here was enable the authorization code flow. And then that's it. That's the only change that I made here. And then also what I did to give access to my other tenants, I created an application, which is right here, for my mainly 2 tenants, the blog 1 and blog 2. I created 2 sites. I call them blog 1, blog 2, and each I use the blog recipe. In here, really, there's not a whole lot to do. I mean, you can put your app name, and then there's the client ID, and then the client secret, and then I'm allowing the authorization code flow. And then also, what's important here is the scopes. I am telling that whoever's requesting permission, they can request a permission to take my role and also email and by profile. So in here, I'm allowing those to be requested. And I think similarly to the other application, I've also created kind of similar thing, but in this case, I did not expose role. I don't know why. Maybe I should. I don't know. forgot if the demo will work without it or with it. So this app, Blog One, this is a tenant. This tenant wants to allow their user to connect to my server and to authenticate. So if, let me log out of the server, because if I don't, it's going to be quick. So if I go in here, and now I'm prompted, so my login screen looks a little bit different now. If you look on the side, I have a list of all that provider, the identity providers that I have enabled for that site. In this case, only one, but you can have Facebook, you can have Google, you can have Microsoft, you can add as many as you want. But in this case, I just want to support my own, because I want all my apps to be able to connect to only one place, which is internal. So if I click here, what's going to happen? It's going to happen quick. If you look at the URL, you're going to see a redirect. It's going to actually redirect us to that server. And see what happened? Look at my URL up top. It changed. Now I'm at the server, at the identity server. And if I put a new user to kind of see the entire flow, so I am back to Blog One. I am already in Blog One and logged in, and not sure what my role is. I think I'm actually logged in as admin. Yeah, I believe I am logged in as admin. So if you notice, I did not provide my site, the Blog One, my credentials at all. My credentials were provided at the server level. The server determined, okay, this guy is good, I'm gonna let him in, and I was able to authenticate into my own app. So if I want to enable two-factor authentication on my server, any app that is doing the same thing will be able to gain access, but after they provide the two-factor authentication. So if you authenticate once, then all these apps are good to go. They don't need to authenticate every single time. What should have happened and didn't happen, because I think I've done this before, is I did not get prompted for permission to, let me try that one more time. The user did not provide me, let me log out of the server one more time. Yeah, just so it's more visible. I don't have to log out, by the way, I just did it because if I don't, it'll be a quick exchange and you won't see it. Let's see, user 2. And these users I pre-created. Okay, so look what happened now. I was prompted to say, do you authorize this application to gain access to your OpenID, profile, email, and role? So if you notice, it's asking me for authorization as a user, manual authorization. Do I want to allow this Blog One site? Yes or no? And if I say no, you can't get access. But if you say yes, look what happens now. Next thing, because my very first time logging in, I'm kind of need to create an account internally. These options in Orchard are configurable, so you can actually bypass all that. So you can just create the account automatically behind the scene, and the user don't need to do this. But in this case, just for the sake of this demo, I'm going to create an account locally. And now I have access. Let's see. Okay. And if you notice here, I kind of gained a higher level access. I think I'm an admin here as well. And that is by design based on my settings. If I go, actually no, I am not an admin here. I might be a contributor or something. But there was a, behind the scenes, I'm going to show the settings now. Behind the scenes there was a mapping done. Remember earlier when I asked for access, I also asked access for role. So I want to know the current role for that user at that server. So the server can come back and say, hey, your role as a contributor or an admin. And then it's up to me to say, okay, if you're an admin there, I'm going to also make an admin here. If you're not an admin, maybe I want to give you a different role. Excuse me. So I'm going to log out and show you that setting real quick. So I'm not going to utilize my server. I'm just going to directly log into the site. So if we go and under the security settings, and there's a couple things. There's a user login here. This checkbox, I checked it. What this one does, it allows me to create a script to say map roles from the external provider to locally. And if you notice here, I'm kind of looping through the external claims, which whatever the server provided back, saying, hey, those are your claims. I'm inspecting the role, and if you are a moderator, I am giving you a moderator role, and so on and so forth. So I'm basically looping through all these claims and checking and it looks like here I just decided to map them one to one. There's probably a better way to do this, but I think this is just more obvious. And in this case, if your role is an admin or administrator, we're going to also allow you to be an administrator on this local site. So, this script is kind of flexible because now you're able to take whatever the server said you are or identify you, and then you can use that to create a local identity. The other option here is the user registration. When you enable that user registration feature, you'll have this settings too. And in here, this is important because you can choose, when you enable that feature, you can choose not to allow registration. And then you can also allow registration, meaning you can allow people on your site to register a new user. Or the last one, you can allow only if you're coming through external user. So meaning we're not going to allow anyone to really create a username on this site, but if you are authenticated, if you have access to that server, then we're going to also allow you to come in. The other script here that I've created was a username mapping, which again, it does a similar thing, but in this case, it utilizes that name claim to say, whatever your name at the server, I'm going to also give you the same name here on my local site. So those are important settings. You can do more here. You can do more here. You can update properties. You can add, like, if you want to map your phone number if the server have your phone number and you want to have the phone number here, well, you can map the phone number too, but you'll just have to request the phone number information through a scope or during the request. All right, the block 2 is also use a similar setup, but in this case, what happens here, if I go in, I can't, if you notice, I'm always redirected to login, because what I did here is I actually secured the app. By default, in Orchard, we give anonymous users read access to all the content, so anybody can read the content. So I took that off because I want to see, how can we secure an app like for internal use only. So in this case, this is an internal use only app, and if I try to hit any route, I'm going to always get redirected here. And similar thing here is you're able to log in. You're able to log in to the server, but also I enabled the register a new user here. So remember I mentioned a few minutes ago is that you have two different options for registration. So in this case, I'm allowing all. So if you want to register a user, here you can go ahead and register a user. You don't have to worry about the provider. But also, if you want to utilize that provider, I also configured it. It's a similar thing. Like what happened? I got prompted, do you authorize block 2? Remember earlier I gave access, or I gave permission to block 1. In this case, now it's asking, do you want to consent to giving block 2 permission? So it's the same thing. So every app will have to go through the authorization process using the flow that I'm using. And after I log in, now I am able to see the content of the site. So the entire site is really secured, and you have to be able to log in. As you can see, I just went to an admin, and I got an error. And it's because my user that I logged in with does not have permission to access the admin panel like it did earlier. So, yeah, that's not sure if I went through all the settings. Oh, one other settings before I wrap it up. On the client side, or on the blog 1 or blog 2, which is the sites that are connecting to my server, in order for me to enable that, there is a setting, well, there is a feature. So I had to enable this OpenID client feature, which is right here. So I have to enable this feature in order for me to be able to connect to my server. And then I also had to do some configuration. So under the security OpenID Connect, under settings, there's an authorization client. So here, I have to provide information that was given to me from that server. So if you notice here, the authority is the server, the SSO server, or SSO server address, the client ID that was added when I went to my server and added a new tenant. These are the callbacks, how the user will be redirected back after they are authenticated. And in here, I am requesting email and role scopes. And those two are on the top of a profile and OpenID. So by default, we'll always request OpenID and profile. But in addition to those, I want to do some roles mapping. So in that case, I'm requesting access to that. And then I also provide the secret, and that's it. There's obviously a lot more complicated settings that we're not going to go through, but you feel free to adventure and check them out. And after I did this, obviously the two sites are now completely integrated. So imagine if you have, you know, a lot of microservices out there. All you need to do, in Orchard at least, enable that client feature, and then configure, add an app into your server, and then use those credentials to give your app access. And now your app can talk to the server and gain access. And if you are concerned about when I logged in, I got prompted with the authorization, that's just because I'm using the code flow. But you can use other flows, like if you want, you know, apps to connect and communicate together behind the scenes, you can use a different flow, like a password flow, where you can, you know, let the system talk without any human authorization in between. I think that's it for me. Hopefully I don't get yelled at for taking a long time, but I am available for any questions. Questions, comments?
Okay. So when you have the local enabled and the OIDC enabled, if you already have a local account with an email and then the scene sign-on requests to create an account with the local, does it know how to link those up?
Yes, so a good question. So if you already have an account, I'm sorry?
Repeat the question.
Oh, so the question is, if I already have, so I'm already on blog 1, and I already have an account, okay? This account was created just regularly without, you know, even before I enabled the server. When I log in through the identity provider, how can I possibly link the two? And so we identify, because you can utilize the mapping, so you can map the username, right? You saw how I mapped it. So when you map it, you're going to get a prompt that say, you know, basically confirm, provide your password, your current password at the local account to ensure that you are who you say you are and you are ready to link the two. And then the link happens, and now that user can still log in with a username and a password, but also can go through the server. So you'll have, the same user can have two ways of logging in. So good question. Yes?
Yeah, is it possible just to use OpenID for your security rather than having local? Like use OpenID exclusively?
You can, but the problem is, how are you going to handle authorization locally on your site, right? Because, you know, the server is not going to be aware of your custom permissions. Like, for example, when I create my own custom permission, the server doesn't know that. So you have to manage that internally. So you could avoid the screen altogether and like just say, in fact, there's a settings. Where's that setting? I think it's under the login settings. Yeah. Yeah, so, right here. So you can see here, you can say, do not ask for email address. You can say, do not create a local password. You can say, do not ask for username. If you check all these and then you're doing the mapping correctly, then the user is just going to automatically, behind the scenes, an account will be created automatically. So you don't really have to, the user doesn't have to know that there's an internal account. But you kind of still need that because you'll need the role, right? So that way you'll know, hey, can that user access this page or not, right? So that's how it works. So you will have identity locally, but the authentication process is delegated elsewhere. So you're still doing your authorization yourself.
And then if you were to change roles or change permissions externally, when the person logs in, would there be a way to update their roles locally?
I don't think that's automatic, but if you deleted that account, another one will be created automatically.
That's one worker.
Yeah, I don't know if someone else knows actually. It's a good question. I would have to look into it and see. I don't think we do though, because we do not evaluate those scopes. Maybe we do actually.
You can, right?
You can.
You can set it all dynamically.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think you can, because every single time you log in, you still go through that process, and we get those claims. The part that I'm not sure about is, do we really update the identity internal? Like, do we really map the roles again every single time or not? That's what I'm not sure.
Only if there's a change, I assume, but
yeah, but
it would be a good thing to check prior to.
True, but it's also concerning, because what if you went in on your local site, you started as an admin, the identity provider said you are an admin, then you're in my site. I'm like, okay, I don't want you an admin, I'm going to remove it. Correct? I don't want you to overwrite that. So if it's kind of too automated, it's also not a good idea, because now you're overriding what the site owner would want. So that's the part that I don't think it does. Can we implement that? We probably could.
Yeah, you do actually automatically check the roles and change it every time the user signs up to the two-factor authorization.
It does it?
Yeah.
It automatically updates it?
Yes.
Okay, well, there's your answer.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes.
With two-factor authentication, I saw you can base it by roles. Is it just all or nothing for each role, or can you set it to where you have one role that maybe has admin view access, I can only do app authentication, versus just a user that can see front end, not back end, and use all three SMS, email, and app authentication.
So if you enable the provider is available to anyone. So you can't say, hey, I want a app, like an email provider only for admins. If that is a question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just to repeat the question to make sure I understood it. Is there a setting to say admins need to have the SMS provider available or enabled, versus if you're an editor, you can have either email or SMS, right? That's the question. Really, not today. And I don't know if there is really a need for that restriction. Maybe there is, but I can't think of one. But if you enable the provider, basically anybody that have access to your site is able to use that provider. Your site supports it. So you have, if you enable the SMS, that means you already integrated the SMS service. You already have some sort of service like a Twilio or something that deliver those messages. So it doesn't matter who, as long as you provide it, you should be able to get to it. Now, if you want to create a custom implementation or to say, hey, if you're an admin, I really have you go through your phone. You could implement that, but we don't have that out of the box. We have a handler. I actually had a little bit more advanced scenario that I had to implement at work, where I had to also check for IPs. So if you are coming from internal IP that we know and trust, you could bypass two-factor authentication. But if you're coming from the outside, then no. Because we have people that are working internally in the facility, and they're not allowed to have their cell phone on them for the second factor authentication. So because of that, we were able to, I implemented the workaround, or utilizing our services, I was able to check where you're coming from, and if you are coming from a trusted IP address, then you can bypass that process. So you can implement such a complicated scenario fairly easily. Yes.
Any plans to support passkeys for admins?
We don't have that yet. Yeah, we don't have that yet, but doesn't mean, you know, we can't implement it. So. Yes.
Towards the beginning, you showed some slides about how to create a permission and a custom, permission provider and authorize based on that in a controller action. Is there a way, if you want to authorize the entire controller like you can with regular .NET, you can use the attributes for like a policy or something? Is there a way to do that with custom?
Yeah, so again, we really built everything on top of the ASP.NET. So whatever you can do with the ASP.NET, you can do with us, with the Orchard. So yes, you can. Typically in Orchard, that's not what we do. Typically we check permissions because every single page has its own permission for a reason, right? Because you want to be able to allow flexibility because, a lot of people are utilizing the framework. How can we allow them to deliver whatever it is that their requirement that they're trying to accomplish? So every page, every action has a different permission. And you can go through, hopefully most of you are familiar with this screen, the role screen. So here you can edit a specific role. And then here you'll see a list of the permissions. As you can see here, this is a description, which is the second parameter of that permission class. And you're able to pick and choose who gets what. So earlier when I wanted to, in my site, my block 2, when I wanted to make sure that I don't want everyone to have access to everything that they can see everything, I went to my authenticated role here and I removed the view all content. View all content. So this right here is checked by default for authenticated users. So if you are authenticated or not authenticated, actually, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong role. It should be anonymous. So any anonymous user is able to read all of our content by default. So if I said I want to change that, then I don't know why I can't find anything. View all there. So view all content right here. I can remove that, and now I secure my entire site because you would have to be authenticated in order for you to see anything. Any other questions?
You are showing us the possibility to set custom email and SMS message for the providers. And I wanted to ask if there's a possibility to make them like language specific for the culture that the user is in. Yeah. So for English users, the message will be in English and so on.
For the SMS messages?
Yes, SMS and email messages.
No, and the reason why, because we don't use shapes for that. We're using templates. So whatever message that you type is the same message that's going to be delivered. It's a good point. Maybe we'll, just like we have content, maybe we should have a way to, localize that message. But no, we don't have that yet. Whatever that message goes out to everyone regardless of who you are. I mean, most people don't care. They don't even read it. They just want the token. So. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time.